Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Healing the Spirit, and welcome to October. So, I want to start this reading by sharing with you a couple I Ching hexagrams that I cast for us today. And I asked the I Ching, can you give us some advice or some wisdom as we navigate the month of October? And I recommend you to return to the I Ching throughout the month. There is kind of a richness and complexity to the I Ching that I find works really well when we give ourselves permission to return to it over and over again. Because as you're listening to this, maybe the first time you listen, it doesn't totally make sense, or it doesn't totally feel like it relates to what you're moving through. And over time, it may be the case that you find pieces of what is being shared here to be of value and to provide timely wisdom for the situation you are seeing in front of you right now. So the two hexagrams are hexagram 10 and hexagram 59. So hexagram 10 is associated with the phrase treading, and it also says conduct in the translation that I use, which is the Brian Brown Walker translation. And the phrase for hexagram 10 is lasting progress is won through quiet self-discipline. This hexagram reminds us that the foundation of proper conduct within ourselves, within the relationships, the interpersonal relationships that we have with others, as well as within the larger society, has to do with rooting firmly in the principles that we know are correct. And this principle, some will call it the principle of the sage, some will call it the Tao, some will call it the heart of Christ. The language itself doesn't matter, but I think we know what it is, right? It is about finding alignment between thoughts and actions. It's about finding alignment between our feelings and our words, being honest with our communications. And it also has to do with aligning our personal will with divine will. The image associated with this hexagram is treading on the tail of a tiger. And the tiger here is really a symbol for strong, potentially destructive forces, whether that be within ourselves or in the situations we find ourselves in, or in other people. And the advice here is to avoid the bite of the tiger by treading carefully. And in treading carefully, the I Ching is reminding us to look within, but also it's like that old adage of one eye in, one eye out, right? We maintain correct action is actually a really dynamic process. And what I mean by that is it's not just about what you do. It's also about ensuring that your attitude as you are doing it is correct. And in order to maintain correct attitude, you also have to continually ask yourself, what is my motivation? Do I have a specific investment around how the situation goes? And to continue to realign with our inner wisdom. This hexagram also reminds us that people will have different levels of spiritual understanding. And our job is not really to correct other people, it's not to condemn other people, but it's to continue developing ourselves, to continue cultivating our own connection with our spirit, our own connection with divine will. And it also reminds us that progress is not achieved through aggressive actions. If you think about finding yourself near a tiger, you don't want to make sudden moves, right? You want to be really careful about your next steps. And it reminds us that when we seek power from a place of ego, from a place of pride, it might be the case that we end up evaporating everything that we've been working for. And so the advice here is to really persevere, um, and to maintain our own relationship with what is correct for us and being really humble, meaning listening to the other's perspective, taking it into consideration without losing sense of our own perspective, being really sincere, right? Speaking from the heart, and knowing that everyone has dignity even when we disagree with them, and being really gentle with how we approach others and not jumping into conclusion. I think this is a really important point because gentleness is not just about speaking really softly, right? It's not about not stepping on anyone's toes, and being really courteous. To me, gentleness goes deeper. Gentleness is about being kind, right? What does it look like if you are in the midst of a disagreement with someone, or if you are in the midst of a tense situation? What does it mean to really listen to your heart and what the wisdom of your heart wants to say in this moment, and to prioritize that rather than going into your thinking mind and trying to solve things really quickly, right? Being really impatient, wanting to find success and wanting to find resolution without a lot of consideration. The two changing lines between hexagram 10 and 59 are the first line and the fourth line. So I love these changing lines in the I Ching because they really speak to us about what we need to pay attention to. The first line asks us to pay attention to the foundation, to the foundations of our actions, to the foundations of our thoughts, foundations of our emotions. And to translate that more concretely, what I mean by that is whenever we are feeling a drive to say something or to do something, really giving ourselves permission to take a moment and ask, is that true, first of all? Does that feel like the true next step for me? Or is there another step that I need to consider? And this may be something that takes 30 seconds for you, but it could alter the way that you navigate your reality quite powerfully. The text that accompanies the first line changing here is ambition and restlessness lead to misfortune. A return to simplicity and humility makes progress possible now. And then with regards to the fourth line changing, to me, the fourth line has a lot to do with our relationships, with really making sure that we relate with others from a space of compassion, from a space of not jumping into conclusions. It says, move ahead cautiously and conscientiously. Your goal is met if you remain devoted to expressing higher things. Or I would also rephrase that into higher values, right? That when we remain devoted to higher values, there may be things that are quick solutions or quick fixes or low hanging fruits that we decide we're not going to partake in right now. And while that may make our lives a little bit challenging in the moment, that might pay off in a really significant way later down the road. Hexagram 59 is about dispersion or dissolution. And the phrase that goes along with it is disperse hard attitudes with gentleness. It's indicating that there's a certain level of rigidity and harshness, whether that be in our own system or in other people. And that's causing us to have some sort of experience of a gridlock, right? When we are stuck in a state of judgment, anger, or we find ourselves really fearful, really anxious, really wanting things to be a certain way and insisting on our way being realized, that is a sign that something within us needs to be tended to. That in order for us to realign with divine will and to allow the will of the divine to move through us, we need to dissolve and we need to relax some of our attachments. The image here I really love because it's so evocative to me, which is the warm spring wind steadily dissolving winter ice. So if you imagine that moment of transition between spring, um, at the end of winter, moving into spring, right? It's the spring wind has the ability to be steady and to be patient in dissolving the winter ice because it is connected to the inevitability of the season changing. The spring wind knows that spring is coming anyway, that part of the dissolution is a natural progress. And this hexagram is also reminding us that as we are moving through this dissolving of our own internal winter ice and the winter ice within others, that we can rely on external, what the I Ching calls religious forces that we can use. I will call it our spiritual tools, right? The spiritual tools at our disposal to start releasing our own rigidities. And we can use music, we can use prayer, we can meditate, we can work on a project that benefits everyone involved. And we can also engage in some form of ritual where we all can connect with higher principles, higher power. And in the process of doing that, allowing ourselves to remember our true essence. And our true essence is not grasping. Our true essence, our true selves, our spirit recognizes that life is long, the universe is vast. And so, whatever potential hurt that we are feeling right now is not going to last forever. We may be feeling the call to forgive others in order to release that rigidity. We may feel the call to really look at what are we holding on to, what trauma are we holding on to, what pain, what um, mistakes that others make that we are still clinging on to, and how can we start to allow ourselves to release our attachment to that, release our attachment to old stories that are no longer relevant for us, that are no longer truly reflective of who we are now, who we know ourselves to be. There's an invitation here to update our consciousness into who we are in present time. And as we come back into the flow that's available to us at any given moment, we will find that the ice flow within ourselves starts to break up and the river starts to thaw, that our own life force energy starts to flow again. And the I Ching, this hexagram is also reminding us that without the act of removing this inflexibility, there can be no unity. There can be no harmony. And often that harmony is, in order for us to become the conduit of that harmony, we need to find it within ourselves first. our willingness to meet the places that feel hard, our willingness to practice acceptance, to practice detachment, to practice equanimity is what then inspires other people to also do the same. That's what inspires other people to truly listen with an open heart. And the hexagram reminds us that as we do this, we ensure that we can tap into our own good fortune. I really love this I Ching reading because we are starting and ending the month with a slew of Mercury transits. And Mercury is the most flexible planet. Mercury is kind of akin to our thinking mind, right? And therefore, because of its flexibility, Mercury needs to be programmed correctly. Mercury needs the correct training, and Mercury requires the right data in order to make sure that we can paint the correct picture. There's this adage, there's a saying in data science, which is garbage in, garbage out, right? Meaning if we are operating or trying to make a decision from the place of not having verified our information or not asking the right questions so that we understand the whole picture, we might be making mistakes. We might be led down the incorrect path. And on a practical level, my first invitation for all of you here is to really be mindful of what information you are consuming. Whose perspectives are you taking in? Whose agenda are you furthering? Continuing to ask yourself this question is going to be really helpful as we move through this month. When in doubt, give yourself permission to retreat, find inner quiet, and ask God, your higher self, the Great Mother, to guide you on your path. Sit within the uncertainty. It's as I'm tuning into the month starting and ending with Mercury transits, I was getting this imagery of the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree, Odin hanging upside down from a tree to achieve enlightenment, Yeshua fasting in the desert for 40 days. There's a reason why, in a lot of esoteric wisdom traditions, the invitation is for us to look within, because as we look within, we will see how we are constantly impacted by the external world. And so, in order for us to really listen to the flow of wisdom and insights that want to come through us, often we need to move through a period of letting all the inner noise start to fall away, right? That inner noise is a byproduct of external noise. And one of the most important tasks on our spiritual path is to discern which of these are really true invitations for us to respond, for us to react, for us to share our opinions, and which ones are really not part of our path. Which ones are really for us to simply observe and become a wise, discerning witness to the situation. The first 2 weeks or so of October, all the exact transits involve only Mercury and Venus, which to me is really unique. And it speaks to how there's an emphasis here on communication, on relating, on how the attitudes, the postures, the energetics of our hearts are reflected through our words. This is some of the same messages that we were receiving from the I Ching reading, right? And the reverse is also true. What we speak through our mouths will also impact the frequency of our hearts. The traffic goes both ways here, right? It's not just that the external impacts or the external reflects the internal, right? But what we decide to say, will also impact our state of being. It behooves us, as we move through the month, to be extra mindful of this correlation. We can think of it as Venus being about values and Mercury being about words, right? Are our values reflected in our words? Are our values reflected in how we say the words? Both planets, Mercury and Venus, also change signs at some point. Mercury starts out in Libra and will move into Scorpio across the course of the month, and Venus will move from Virgo to Libra. When we start out with Mercury being in Libra, Venus in Virgo, there is what we call mutual reception here, which means that the two planets are in each other's homes, they can resource one another, and they can advise one another. Now, Venus is technically in fall in Virgo, but Venus in Virgo to me is an artisan. Venus in Virgo is a craftsperson who really cares about precision. And Libra, Mercury in Libra is really caring about, are all the sides getting their airtime, right? Are we listening to all the sides carefully? What is being communicated here, right? Mercury in Libra is an invitation to connect with the heart of what is being said. That often in our communications, it's not just the words, but it's the frequency behind the words. Because often that frequency is telling us that there is a need that wants to be witnessed. And as we give ourselves permission to go deeper into that level of attunement, of really listening to what wants to be said, what is this person trying to communicate with me beyond the level of their words, we get to find a more pleasurable, more harmonious, and ultimately deeper understanding of one another and of reality. So, some of the ways that this Mercury Venus situation can show up are we're being asked to create new relational contracts or to update existing ones. This is actually a theme that I've been noticing as quite relevant for some time. I think this is at least the third week that this theme is kind of coming in as a really important lesson, as a really important exploration for us all to be working through. Imbalances in relating can show up for us in order for us to be able to address what are some of the underlying issues behind those imbalances. Are there things that we are repressing? Are there suboptimal treatments that we've received from other people that we are letting slide because we're afraid to bring it up? And the reverse can also be true, right? Is there something that others have been repressing because they're afraid of expressing it to us? Are there ways where they have accepted less than optimal treatment simply because they want to keep the peace between us, right? And so, as a general reminder, we are all adults, hopefully, listening to this. And so, we are responsible for meeting our own needs. And we can do so through the power of our own awareness and our own communication skills. So, notice places where you might want to blame other people for an experience that you are moving through right now. And see if you can take a little bit of time to really affirm your own experience and to tend to the hurt that you might be feeling, to tend to the challenging experiences. And then from that place, communicating clearly. Hey, I was feeling this way when you said this. Can we talk about this? Can I express to you some of what I'm feeling? And can we come to a different conclusion? Can we come to a different way of relating with one another? When these dynamics come up, at first we may really have to say it the messy way, right? Especially when emotions have been repressed for some time, we may have to kind of let it all hang out in the open and it may be uncomfortable. But as we get through the discomfort, we may see deeper layers. And in seeing the deeper layers, there will be opportunities for true healing. There's a lot of support for setting new standards that are kind, compassionate, and firm for everybody involved. And when I say firm here, that doesn't mean that we're meant to lock it into a forever and ever policy, right? That's really not what I'm saying here, because when it comes to relating with other people, everything is changing all the time. We're dynamic beings and we're always shifting, right? And so honoring our multidimensional nature is important, and at the same time too really coming from a place of respecting others, sharing how we feel with honesty and also discernment and wisdom, right? Coming from a place of love um rather than judgment, because I think so easily we can think that we are coming from love, but it's actually in the name of self-interest, right? We just want our lives to be easier. That's why we want to change other people. That's tale as old as time, right? And so um the last reminder I want to say here is, just because something has been imbalanced for some time doesn't mean that it has to permanently stay there forever. There's, especially with Venus in Virgo, opportunities for us to meet old patterns from a new place. And as we bring our present moment wisdom into these old patterns, they may immediately start shifting, right? We might start to find ourselves transforming some of these old patterns. There's also artistic exploration available during the month. The sun is in Libra, which is a very artistic sign. Libra is one of the homes of Venus. And so a question we may want to explore is, how can I bring more artistry into my life? How can I bring more artistry into my relationships, into my work, into how I clean my house? Even areas like managing our assets, making preparations for times of financial difficulties, or maybe the eventual passing of a loved one. All of these are relevant for Libra season. Remember that Libra is the beginning of the descent into the underworld in the northern hemisphere. Libra is about the balance of light and dark. The sun is what we call fallen in Libra, right? So we have this experience of the light in the northern hemisphere literally decreasing during Libra season. And so these preparations for more challenging times can be approached with a lot of artistic flair, right? And this, I think, can be such a helpful reframe, because a lot of the times when we think about endings, when we think about the eventual passing of certain projects or certain relationship or certain businesses, we are often overwhelmed by our grief. And that is an important component to address, to really allow ourselves to feel our own feelings. But as we move through that, I think bringing in creativity is always available. There's always a more creative, artistic way to engage with something, right? If you were to bring more of a sense of artistry into your day job or into your relationship with people that you share your commute with, what would that look like? This is not an invitation to bypass the challenges that life presents, but rather this is to honor the duality that hardship and resources are both always available to us. And finally, I also want to bring in this piece because it was kind of coming in pretty strong, which is that there's opportunities for very real and very tangible physical transformations. When this information came to me, it kind of felt I felt it kind of sizzling in my system. There's makeover vibes here for sure. So if you've been thinking about changing your hairstyle, or if you've been thinking about changing how you present yourself aesthetically, Venus in Virgo and Mercury in Libra at the start of the month can really assist you in doing the research, talking to different people about it. And then as Venus moves into Libra and Mercury moves into Scorpio, I think there's a lot of opportunities here to actually follow through with it if that's what you decide you truly want. And the same kind of aesthetic makeover opportunities are also available if you are running your business, if you're an entrepreneur, or maybe if you are engaging in creative practices, if you're an artist. This can be a really great time to change the direction of your business, to change the focus of your practice. And the reminder here is to continue to connect it to your values. What do you truly value, right? Oftentimes, these makeovers kind of become something that we potentially regret, or a project that isn't ultimately satisfying when we don't connect it to a deeper value. So as the first couple weeks, when Venus was still in Virgo, Mercury is in Libra, this is a really great time to ask ourselves, why do I want to do this, right? Why do I feel called to make this aesthetic transformation? And aligning your values with your practices can be really powerful for this transit, especially in the first couple weeks of October. Okay, great. Let's get into the transits. So on October 1st, we have Mercury in Libra squaring Jupiter in Cancer. Although squares are generally considered a hard aspect, both Cancer and Libra, as well as Mercury and Jupiter, have this complementary relationship. To me, when I think about Mercury and Jupiter, it's not just that they are kind of the opposites attract type of situation, right? But these are planets that can actually really enrich one another. Mercury likes to focus on the details. Jupiter likes to focus on the big picture. Mercury likes to move the story along. Jupiter likes to make sure that the growth is sustainable and can probably last for a long time. And when we think about Cancer and Libra, right, Cancer cares a lot about feelings and about ensuring that on an emotional level, everyone is being nourished. And Libra wants to make sure that all sides are being heard, right? Both Jupiter in Cancer and Mercury in Libra cares about some of the things that may not be the same, but are complementary in nature. Jupiter in Cancer cares about true nourishment and grounded, sustainable care, not just surface level performative acts of caring. I believe this was maybe Diana Rose Harper who has taught about how Jupiter in Cancer is pointing to the difference between nourishment and consumption, right? We can consume things, we can consume a lot of information, we can consume a lot of food, but not be nourished, right? When we talk about nourishment, there's an element of attunement that is necessary here, right? What is nourishing to one person may not be nourishing to another person. What is nourishing at one stage of the life cycle of a project, for example, may not be nourishing at a different stage, right? And so really attuning to what is needed, right? Proper timing, proper dosage is really important here. Mercury in Libra cares about all the different sides having their voices heard, right? Getting their airtime. Balance can only really be achieved when communication happens, when true communication happens, when all the parties are listening, speaking, giving, and receiving, right? And overall, with this transit, as we start the month, we might notice imbalances surfacing, but I think the invitation here is to really clock that. Like, what are some of these relational imbalances, right? What are some of the imbalances when it comes to, the different needs that we have? And then as we navigate it, we'll see that this theme comes again in a different format, as other planets have this square between Libra and Cancer, right? And how we can the story will continue to evolve as we go through the month. It may lead to an upleveling of how we show care to one another. When we navigate these imbalances with wisdom, when we navigate it with a lot of awareness, we can really get through to the other side with uh, something completely surprising to us. That maybe what we've categorized as, oh, someone is just being cranky, someone is just complaining for the sake of complaining, maybe actually there's a deeper need that wants to be witnessed. And when we actually tend to some of these needs, we start to find a different level of collaboration with one another. On October 4th, we have Venus in Virgo on the nodes, specifically conjoining the south node and opposing the north node in Pisces. So Venus brings pleasure and appreciation for everything that it touches. And when Venus comes to the nodes, right, the nodes here, especially in the Virgo Pisces axis, to me, has a lot to do with letting go as an act of service. So you may find that this is a useful transit for releasing or surrendering of any kind, particularly the things in our lives and the dynamics in our lives that no longer play a role, but maybe can benefit other people. So, a very practical way that Venus opposing the North Node can show up is this can be a really great time to take stock of your belongings around the house and maybe see which ones can be donated to the local library. Maybe some of our books are ready to be donated, or perhaps some of our clothes, right, can be given to Goodwill, or maybe we can swap that on the internet with other people in the neighborhood who may need these items. Venus in Virgo is a reminder that releasing clutters and creating more space in our lives can bring in more creativity. A lot of the times when we feel creatively or artistically blocked, it's not because we're not connected enough to our desires, but it's usually because our system is overloaded with prior commitments, with unspoken agreements, with responsibilities that maybe no longer move the needle, and maybe even actual physical stuff, right? So releasing some of the things that we don't need is really kind of the name of the game as we start the month here. On October 6th, we have the full moon in Aries, and we also have Mercury entering Scorpio. Now, this full moon is interesting because we have the moon in Aries, ruled by Mars, which is now in Scorpio. So Mars is at home. We have the sun fallen in Libra, ruled by Venus, which is fallen in Virgo. So the moon is very strong, right? This specific lunation can bring in impulsiveness. As always, everything can be both positive and negative, right? Depending on what you would like to accomplish. So, as we are entering this full moon, you may want to ask, what am I trying to accomplish? What do I want to show up in my reality, right? This is a great transit for making empowered moves to go after what you want, to do the brave thing that you've been wanting to do for a while, but maybe have been sitting on your hands. This is a great lunation to find out about the truth, right? When we think about that moon ruled by a Mars, domicile in Scorpio, this is investigative journalism vibes, to the max, right? And I think I'll also add here, for those of us who are on the path of continuing to cultivate self-honesty about our own internal desires, about what truly moves us, about what is our work to engage, with, this can be a really great time to do some of these kind of self-reflective work. There's also propensity with this full moon for agreements to be broken off, especially agreements that were set a long time ago. There's also potential for straying away from socially acceptable social conventions. Um, and it may bring up challenges around clauses in spoken or unspoken agreements that we've maybe glossed over. So when I say agreement, I know it sounds a little lawyerly, maybe. It sounds like we're kind of in a law office. But I think the truth is we all make agreements all the time in our relationships, right? And so this lunation will show you where these social agreements are in direct conflict with your desires to be independent or to act in a way that reflects your high degree of internal agency, right? There's also a wide square to Jupiter for this specific full moon, which to me brings up again that theme around what it means to care for one another. I think this lunation can bring up a lot of conversations around, I thought you cared about me, therefore I assumed you're going to do XYZ for me. And yes, in the beginning, when these conversations come up, it can feel like a conflict. But I think there's a lot of potential here for coming up with, again, new agreements that are beneficial and healthier for everybody involved. And know that some of these agreements can be with yourself too. You might really have to navigate your own boundaries, what you're okay with, what you're not okay with, where you are willing to freely give to other people, where you're willing to contribute your time, your energy, and where you will be resentful. And so you may have to rethink your strategy. You may have to rethink your own idea of what it means to be a generous person. On October 7th, we have Mercury in Scorpio squaring Pluto in Aquarius. Now, notice how this is a square, right? Mercury in Libra earlier in the month was having also a square with Jupiter in Cancer. But this square between Mercury and Scorpio and Pluto in Aquarius feels very different for me than that square at the start of the month. This one feels like a tense transit. It feels like kind of this gridlock energy, clenched jaw energy. And you'll see that throughout the month, this is also kind of a recurring theme. Like we see this with some other transits as well. And I think this is the first place that we're seeing it. Mercury is interested in moving the story along, right? Whereas Pluto is interested in uncovering underlying power structures. There's some level of sympathy there between Mercury and Pluto on a planetary agenda level, right? Mercury is like, I want the plot to move along, and Pluto is like, let us understand what are some of the power dynamics here. The two of them might want to move at slightly different paces, but I think the two have similar agenda, right? Or can find sympathy as they are trying to meet their agenda. That being said, Scorpio and Aquarius are not signs that I have found to work super well with one another, because the two signs can hold a lot of fixedness in very different areas. Both signs care about foundations, but Scorpio pays attention to motivational, emotional, energetic foundations, whereas Aquariuses can insist on right philosophy, right principles, and there can be a mismatch there, right? Because you can have the right mental philosophy, the right principles, but not come from the right motivational or emotional foundations. And sometimes you can operate from the correct emotional foundation without being tethered to right philosophy, right? It's also interesting to note that the ruler of Mercury here is going to be Mars in Scorpio, whereas Pluto will answer to Saturn in Pisces. So there's definitely more water in the situation than air, right? So even though It looks like on the surface, it's like a water versus air kind of square that we're having here. What's really going on underneath is Mars um, is kind of, and later we'll see this in the month. Mars is kind of having this loose grand water trine with Saturn in Pisces and also Jupiter in Cancer, right? And so there's a lot of water going on during the month. And the advice that I would give here for this specific, if you are noticing tension happening around that time of October 7th, is to really look under the hood when ideological tension is coming up. It may seem on the surface that this is really about the ideas, right? This is really about the philosophy, about the morality, when actually the deeper conflict is the human need to be seen, the human need to be properly listened to be attuned to on a deeper level. I think this theme has come up a few times as I'm speaking, and I think this is very, very important here because a lot of the times we get into these intellectual debates when, especially in close relationships with other people, when actually that's not really the root of the problem. And so going back to the idea of the gridlock that we are experiencing and that we are noticing here, trying to solve problems on an ideological level may lead nowhere with this transit. So, if someone is terrified of a specific outcome showing up, you might not be able to convince their mind to see your perspective. You might really need to sit down with them and kind of, in a way that is respectful to who they are, maybe as an adult, right? You may really need to kind of speak to their child self that may be a little bit afraid or a little bit activated with what's happening. Okay, on October 8th, we have Venus in Virgo sextiling Jupiter in Cancer. Venus and Jupiter are both benefics, so they are going to be concerned with harmony, with coherence, with honoring the good in life, looking on the bright side, with collaboration. The combination of the signs Virgo and Cancer, it's very much about strategizing how to get our needs met on a practical, mundane, logistical level. This is a really great transit for assessing, are we properly resourced to achieve what we want? Are we getting the right amount of resources and are we getting the correct kind of resources? So quantity matters here and quality matters as well. And if we are not currently properly resourced, whether that is by quality or by quantity, is there anyone in our network of people and our network of non-human allies that we can tap into to be able to receive the resources that we need? This transit is making me think of the Six of Pentacles, which is a tarot card associated with rebalancing resources, redistributing wealth, properly caring for those who are in less lucky or fortunate positions on their path, right? True generosity is really a way of honoring the life that we've been given. True generosity is not something that we do to prove that we are good people. It's not something that we do to get praise from other people. It is really born out of the recognition that life is inherently, by nature, abundant. And so by giving from our overflow, not out of sacrifice, not out of martyrdom, we are saying to life, thank you. Thank you for this gift that you've given me. Generosity is not just monetary, it's also energetic, it's also intellectual, it's also emotional. The other day, somebody I was in conversation with, we were talking about how uh, someone we know mutually is very generous with connecting people on their network, right? And I was thinking about, oh, yeah, I haven't thought about this consciously for a while, that one of the ways we can show generosity is by sharing who we know, right? It's kind of like that old saying of like, it's not about what you know, but about, or like, not about who you know, but about who knows you, right? And I think this can be very true, that one form of resourcing in life is being connected to the right people and being able to tap into that resource, being able to say, hey, would you like to invest in this endeavor that I'm doing? And for people to trust you enough to be able to say yes, right? Um, and where I was really going with this is because Venus in Virgo sextiling Jupiter in Cancer. Sextiles are very subtle transits. So, a lot of the times with sextiles, we need to bring some awareness, we need to bring some consciousness. It usually doesn't just kind of happen on its own. And so, the invitation here is to look around and really ask ourselves, are there ways that we can more accurately resource ourselves and other people in our vicinity? And can we practice generosity as we are meeting those needs? Okay, on October 11th, we have Venus in Virgo opposing Saturn in Pisces. Oppositions, again, are hard aspects like squares, but similar to Mercury squaring Jupiter, that started out the month, this one has a certain softness to it. This one has a certain flow, in my opinion. Venus and Saturn have an affinity with one another. Venus rules Taurus and Saturn rules Capricorn, which is a trine, right? Venus rules Libra and Saturn rules Aquarius, which is another trine. And so Venus and Saturn have this natural friendliness with one another. They are very different in nature. Venus and Saturn have really different agenda. But when put in the same room, the Venusian and the Saturnian can find powerful opportunities for collaborations, for strengthening one another, for deepening that potential for long lasting sweetness. And so this transit may be showing us where we're being a little too harsh, a little too critical with ourselves, while at the same time showing us where practicing being easier on ourselves and on our loved ones can really go a long way. The metaphor that came to my mind when thinking about Venus and Virgo opposing Saturn in Pisces is when I was in conservatory, when I was in music conservatory, I was studying classical piano. There was this professor, I didn't study with him, but he was very famous for prescribing to students to practice without the pedal. So if any of you have played the piano, right, the sustain pedal helps you create this, helps you connect the notes, right, and helps you create this beautiful blanket of sound at the piano. And the pedal, while it also helps create this really beautiful sound, it also hides your mistakes, right? It hides the places where maybe you're a little bit shaky. So when you practice without the pedal and you really only rely on your fingers to make the sound and to connect the notes that maybe need to be connected for musical purposes, when you reintroduce the pedal, it suddenly sounds amazing. And I'm sure there are other analogies that you can draw from with other art forms, right? But it's kind of giving me this very specific example, because when we're thinking about Venus opposing Saturn, Venus is kind of saying to Saturn, hey, have you considered that loosening some of your ideas and rigidity, your desire for structure, your requirement for rules might actually help you achieve the things that you want to achieve? And Saturn looked at Venus and be like, you know what? You might be right about that, right? And so we might find ourselves in these experiences where we have been practicing without the pedal, so to speak, for a long time, right? And so everything kind of sounds dry and a little bit not that great. And as Venus comes into opposition with Saturn, we might find, oh, actually, we don't have to work so hard, right? Throughout human evolution and human history, we are so used to things being so hard. And I think this is part of why humans seem to have a kind of self destructive tendency, especially when there's a lot of peace, right? Because we seem to not know how to be with not having problems. So there's a reminder here, a gentle reminder with this transit that yes, laying solid foundations is really important, right? But make sure you're not losing sight of why you're doing it in the first place. Remember why it was that you wanted to lay strong foundations and let that be your North Star. When you're in the weeds of a specific craft or a specific situation, a job, a relationship, it can be easy to be overly critical with yourself. A disappointment and disillusion is an experience that I associate with the Virgo Pisces axis. So if you find yourself disappointed with how something is progressing, just consider the possibility that you may need to take a break rather than quitting something altogether. Right now, with all the intensity of the Virgo Pisces activation, things may feel a lot worse than it actually is. It may feel like, wow, everything's kind of falling apart. We are seeing the flaws. And a practice that can be really helpful, specifically for this Venus opposing Saturn transit, is to set aside our own mental pictures of what it means to do things correctly. 99% of things that we do in this world, there's no one right way to do it, right? There are many different paths to doing it. There's that old saying, there's many roads to Rome, right? I think this is true for a lot of things in life. And so cutting ourselves some slack or maybe noticing places where we've gotten a little too rigid, to go back to the I Ching reading, and then relaxing around that can be really helpful. And remember how in hexagram 59, right, I believe we were talking about how we can rely on our spiritual tools like music, prayer, meditation, working together on a project that benefits other people. I think this is a transit where that can be really helpful during this Venus opposing Saturn transit. I think we can really rely on some of our spiritual tools, our artistic tools to lessen some of the impact and release some of the rigidities we have within ourselves. On October 13th, we have Pluto stationing direct in Aquarius and Venus entering Libra, and immediately after, Venus will oppose Neptune in Aries. This marks the first turning point energetically during the month. Once Venus enters Libra, we'll have a bit more of a party vibe. Now, notice when Venus is in Libra, Mars is also in Scorpio, right? So we have this really potent period of time for the rest of October where Mars and Venus are domicile. Mars and Venus are both very corporeal signs or very corporeal planets, meaning the experiences that we as humans have when it comes to martial and Venusian things are very much in the body, right? This is a great time to get things done. Those of you who have projects that you want to launch, I would say this is a really fertile time for bringing that out into the world. Venus in Libra brings an eye for artfulness. Mars in Scorpio brings an X-ray vision, right? Mars in Scorpio knows how to troubleshoot in a way that is clean, in a way that is precise, in a way that gets to the foundation of things. Combined, they provide possibilities for rallying, for accomplishing goals, for forward momentum in ways that can feel really vigorous and really satisfying. This is also the first of the Venus-Neptune opposition in Libra and Aries. The previous Venus-Neptune opposition was in Pisces and Virgo. And moving forward, we'll continue to have this specific transit in Libra and Aries. And to me, this is a really exciting transit. There's potential for creative solutions, for bold actions, for new novel innovations, for new relationships. And it is especially exciting for creatives. Venus in Libra is not afraid of being playful, of being flirty. Venus in Libra doesn't want to take herself too seriously, while also still making sure that things get done and that throughout it can feel like a party, right? Neptune in Aries um, will really appreciate getting a chance to be in this dance partnership with Venus in Libra. The image that I'm getting is flamenco dancers. You know, flamenco is such a stylish, flamboyant, powerful, collaborative dance, right? And I think there's something so activating with this specific transit. Be mindful of getting swept away. That's always true with any Neptunian transit. Be careful with saying yes to something that you might regret later, even though I would say that's kind of not the biggest deal in the world if that happens, because if you continue to check in with yourself, you're always able to get out of it, right? Most of the time. Um, just make sure that if you're getting into something, it's not going to be very costly for you to get out, basically. Maintain your boundaries, maintain proper alignment with your own internal system of values. Neptune can bring a lot of fantasy into the picture, which is great for creative endeavors. And it can also point to experiences of being too enthusiastic about doing stuff that later on you might not have a lot of energy or appetite for anymore. On October 14th, we have Venus in Libra trining Uranus in Gemini, and also Venus in Libra will trine Pluto in Aquarius. Now, this energy I want to contrast it with late last month, around December 23rd, 24th, right after the solar eclipse. We were experiencing a similar transit, but it wasn't Venus, it was the Sun. The Sun was entering Libra, and then it was creating this trine with Uranus and with Pluto. And the Sun, to me, this was a very different experience. The Sun in Libra coming into this configuration, opposing Neptune, trining Uranus, trining Pluto, felt almost powerless, whereas with Venus, it is feeling very playful to me. Again, there's a lot of fecund energy here for intellectually stimulating, titillating conversations, for really powerful collaborations with the seen and the unseen. This is also potentially a really great time to revisit challenging topics, conversations that maybe came up during the solar eclipse. There is space for coming to a very different conclusion here. My sense is that we are turning a corner after we got out of the September 24th pickle jar. If you remember, that transit was particularly challenging. There was also like a Mars situation there. So you might find that around this time in the middle of October, the story has progressed quite a bit from that time. And this is a really great time for solidifying, maybe even healing the relationships after what felt like tender and painful dynamics back then. On October 17th, we have the Sun in Libra squaring Jupiter in Cancer. So again, this is providing a bit of a mirror from what happened earlier in the month with Mercury in Libra squaring Jupiter in Cancer, right? And I was having a discussion with some of my astrology students about, wow, these are squares, right? Which is, if you learn astrology, you know that squares are said to be very challenging. They provide, they're asking us to slow down a little bit. There's kind of a gridlock energy with squares. But to me, that feels more true for this Sun in Libra squaring Jupiter in Cancer than Mercury squaring Jupiter. Um, there's so much more tension here. The Sun and Jupiter are both kings, right? They're both sovereigns. And so there's potential for power struggles, there's potential for jumping to conclusions. This to me is a great time to go back to hexagram 10 from the I Ching reading earlier, right? Be careful not to unnecessarily step on someone else's tiger, right? Someone else's ego. Be mindful of your own unconscious tendency to get jealous about someone else's fortunes, right? Their social capital, their wide network of supportive friends, their good luck, right? And be mindful of not quickly judging someone else based on the very limited information you have about them. Be really mindful of gossips. It's interesting because I probably would use the word gossip for Libra, but I think specifically with Sun in Libra, there's something here about being mindful to really appreciate yourself. I find that a lot of the times, the pattern of wanting to gossip comes, or wanting to talk shit about other people, comes from feeling insecure about ourselves. I've been watching Project Runway reruns, like some of the earlier seasons, and it's so funny because it's like the same dynamic over and over again, uh, just different players for different seasons. And something that became increasingly clear are two things. When someone is boasting and when someone is gossiping, those usually come from being really insecure with themselves. And usually that's kind of confirmed later on, right? When we're really mindful of who we are, what we bring to the table, our own abilities, we usually have no problem just kind of settling and getting down to work. And talking behind someone's backs is a sign that you need to get right with yourself, essentially, right? The spiritual lesson here is about forthrightness, is about honesty, fairness, balance. It's about treating other people how you want to be treated, even if that means sacrificing short term, lucrative or delicious opportunities. Between October 18th to October 20th, we have a slew of Mars and Mercury trines to the North Node. So we have Mars in Scorpio trining North Node in Pisces on October 18th. And then on October 19th, Mercury in Scorpio is also trining the North Node. And then on October 20th, Mercury in Scorpio will conjoin Mars in Scorpio. Now, here are some of the keywords that are relevant for these three planets. For the North Node, it's excess, right? It's hunger. For Mercury, Mercury is really the free agent who's often influenced by other planets, which is why at the beginning I said, be careful to program Mercury carefully, right? Be mindful. And then for Mars, Mars is the god of war. Mars is about strife, about willpower, about action. And I want to bring in the decans here. So each slice of the astrological sign are really split up into three categories, right? So each of the first 10 degrees is the first decan, second is the second decan, and the third is the third decan, right? For every zodiac sign. So this aspect is happening around in the second decan of Pisces and Scorpio. So I want to read you the image. I want to share with you the image for the second decan of Scorpio and Pisces. For the second decan of Scorpio, the image is an apparatus for mutual distillation. This image to me points to how full union requires letting down any guard to unleash a passion that has no calculation, right? That in order for two beings or two people to fully unite, they need to kind of let down their idea of what it means to be me, what it means to be you, right? There needs to be kind of this stripping away into full nakedness. And while this kind of union can bring about a unique combination and distillation of two energies that, each of the components will not be able to come up with on its own. If this union is not done with wisdom, if this union is not done with discernment, it can also bring a kind of toxic corruption. So that's the second decan of Scorpio. The second decan of Pisces is the net, and it really speaks to this necessity to maintain spiritual and material correctness. It's about finding harmony with one's ideals without losing touch with the problems and the imperfections of mundane reality. It is reminding me of how artists and musicians are kind of always lamenting the fact that the finished product is never going to match the initial strike of inspiration, right? That when you receive that initial inspiration, it always feels more amazing. But that doesn't mean that making art itself has no value, right? And this is what the second decan of Pisces is struggling with, right? There is this constant negotiation between, okay, we know that the mundane reality will never be as perfect as the frequency. What do we do about it? Right? It's about finding sincerity, and it's about staying truthful while being in touch with the fact that reality is always going to fall short on some level. So combining all of that between October 18th to 20th, this feels like an extra important practice. It feels like an extra important time to practice discernment. The low-hanging fruit here is to act quickly, to be as swift as possible, to strike while the iron is hot. But because this is about water signs, right? Being really mindful with where we're coming from is really of the utmost importance here. Are you moving from fear of missing out, or are you moving from true collaboration with life? When you sense into the energy, when you sense into how it lands in the body, the two feels very different, right? When we're moving from a fear of missing out, when we're kind of just merging with everyone and everything else around us, versus when we're truly saying yes to collaboration with life, there's such a different energy. One feels grounded, one feels sure, even in the flow, even in the fluidity of life, and the other one feels like kind of a seaweed being thrown around by the current of the ocean, right? On October 21st, we have Mercury exiting the shadow period in Scorpio, and we have the new moon in Libra at 28 degrees. This lunation is a breath of fresh air after the eclipses, and even when compared to the earlier full moon in Aries. Both sun and moon in this lunation are ruled by Venus in Libra, which is domicile. And so this is a really great time to set your intention for what can bring greater connectivity, greater pleasure, greater beauty into your life. It is also in a bit of a square with Jupiter, which to me is an invitation for really carving out some spacious time for intention setting, for creating the energetic space to really connect with the intention we may want to set for the area of life that is governed by Libra in our chart. So if you know your personal chart, look at where Libra is and ask yourself, how can I bring in more connectivity? How can this be a little easier? How can this be more beautiful? Conscientiousness goes a long way with this specific new moon. Okay, and then on the 22nd, we have Neptune, which is currently retrograde, re-entering Pisces, and then we have the Sun entering Scorpio. So this marks another turning point in the month. From this point on, we have planets in water signs that will be activated via transits. Some of the themes that are available here are emotional reckoning, patterns of merging. Remember how water takes on the shapes of the containers, right? Likewise, when planets are in water signs, we are asked to look at where these patterns are in our lives of merging without maybe thinking about it or without properly setting the container. It's also a time where the question of what is life giving and what takes away from our aliveness may be pretty up in the collective conversation. To me, this time from the 22nd of October to the end of October feels almost conceptual. It's like entering a David Lynch movie. There may not be a lot of clarity on whether something is metaphorical, meaning happening on a spiritual level, where maybe there needs to be more awareness brought into the situation, or if there's an easy three-dimensional fix. We might be getting into territories where things feel a little bit less straightforward here. And I really mean this in many areas of our lives, right? Because it's a transit that is happening on a collective level. But specifically, if you look at your chart and you look at the water houses, they may be really impacted here. So you might find that this is not the greatest time to try to come up with a solution, especially if the solution is not immediately obvious to you. If you are finding yourself scraping around for solutions, trying to scratch the itch of like, oh, this situation is so uncomfortable, I just want to get it off my back, that is probably an invitation to actually slow down, to communicate where applicable and where relevant to other people who are involved that, hey, I may not be able to have an answer for you within a specific time frame. Can we shift the expectations around a little bit? So on October 24th, we have the Sun in Scorpio squaring Pluto in Aquarius. Out of all the tension-filled aspects of the month, this one feels probably the most tense to me personally. This is obviously a continuation of what came up earlier with Mercury and Pluto square, but this feels like the novel version versus the short story that we were experiencing earlier in the month. This is like the movie, whereas earlier we were just watching the trailer, right? So the sun wants to illuminate, while Pluto, by nature, wants to obscure. So immediately there's tension there. There's discrepancy and there's mismatch between personal motivation and overarching philosophy. We already talked about this earlier. Pluto in Aquarius is relatively a new energy on the block. This might be hard to fathom because this whole year Pluto has been in Aquarius and it's felt like we've been living under this for a very long time. But this is a long transit. Pluto in Aquarius, Pluto will be in Aquarius for a long time, right? Over a decade. And so it's still trying to figure out what it wants to do. There is this thought form that I think is floating around that sometimes we think that planets know everything, right? That planets are kind of like these gods, that know everything. But I think in my own experience and observation, the truth is that planets also evolve. And so I imagine that within the next few years, even our idea of what is correct for human relations will change, right? Um, what it means to be human, connecting and relating to one another, will go through pretty dramatic shifts. A lot of modern astrologers like to talk about Aquarius as this humanitarian, forward thinking, alien like, bringing this kumbaya energy, right? Um, Especially when people talk about the age of Aquarius. It's like, oh yeah, the age of Aquarius, will totally shift everything that's wrong with the age of Pisces. And I don't think that's entirely true. I think Aquarius looks deeply under the hood into how people think, into how societies connect or cohere with one another. But to me, the heart of Aquarius is an investigation into patterns of thinking, which includes patterns of believing, right? The study of ontology, or what we even consider as reality, is a very Aquarian study in nature. So just know that these questions of like, why are people acting the way they're acting? Who is correct in this situation, right, might really come up throughout the end of the month here. And there may be some really heated conversations happening. From this point on, we have Mercury and Mars both in Scorpio, trining Jupiter in Cancer, and Saturn in Pisces. So, first, we have Mercury in Scorpio, trining Jupiter in Cancer. On October 25th, we have Mercury in Scorpio, trining Saturn in Pisces. On the 28th, we have Mars in Scorpio, trining Jupiter in Cancer. 29th, we have Mars in Scorpio, trining Saturn in Pisces. So this is just a slew of transits involving Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, right? And this to me feels like a follow-up to the earlier saga of Mercury, Mars, and the North Node. So when we were talking about the decans, right, the second decans, this is happening in the third decan, so it's a different energy. But what really stuck out to me are that all of these planets are what in traditional astrology we would classify as male in gender. Now, a lot of people get really triggered by this. A lot of the ideas of gender are outdated. Let's just start there, right? I agree with that, obviously. If you know me at all, you know that I agree with that. I think genders are constructs, but there's a reason why traditional astrologers classify the planets in this way, because what they are trying to do, right, with classifications of planets, classifications of signs, is not to pigeonhole these energies and these archetypes into male, female, right, but rather to understand the experience that they're having. So, what do I mean by that? These are planets that are traditionally classified as male that are in water signs, and water signs are feminine in nature. So there's inherent tension here, right? Let's talk about them one by one. Mercury wants fast, clean solutions. Mars wants actions, right? Saturn wants rules. Jupiter wants truth and wisdom. And in water signs, it's not that these are not available, but they do require a willingness to be with the unknown, to be with the mystery, to be with the maze and the nonlinear aspect of reality, right? Because water is fluid. Water obscures by nature. If you look at water and you try to see what's underneath the surface, the appearance of water will distort the image, right? And so, to me, this is not a time for us to be kind of doing the out there in the world impulsive action at the expense of not listening to our inner truth, right? This is a time to get really clear about aligning your motivations with your actions, aligning your frequency with form, aligning the energetic with the policies, right? This configuration may not present difficulties that are in your face, right? But it will show you what is your level of capacity to work with the slippery, the uncertain nature of the human emotional body. And I think that overall, this whole water sign situation is going to be helped by the fact that Mars is in domicile in Scorpio and Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, right? So that I think doesn't automatically make it easier, but I do think that when we really practice what we've talked about in the beginning, right, of one eye in, one eye out, right, really making sure that our actions are aligning with our principles, that how we express ourselves are really true to how we actually feel on the inside, we will feel more alignment and flow and harmony available. And maybe there's even breakthroughs available here because, again, with water signs, a lot of the things that can be challenging with other signs, right, can kind of just quickly fall into place for water signs. I think water has this energy of like conflict, emotions, and then suddenly bloop, just solutions, right? Solutions appear out of nowhere. Um, the word, I think the phrase that feels so true is emotional alchemy. I think there's a lot of emotional alchemy that wants to happen in the last stretch of October. Okay, so then we have Mercury in Scorpio trining Neptune in Pisces. We have Mercury entering Sagittarius. And then once Mercury enters Sagittarius, it opposes Uranus. And then on the 30th, we have Mercury sextiling Pluto in Aquarius. So we end the month again with a slew of Mercury transits. These last few days, slew of Mercury situationship feels very different to me than the start of the month. It feels really playful. It feels full of possibilities, especially once Mercury enters Sagittarius. It will answer to Jupiter in Cancer. So this is not just possibilities that are rooted in nothing. This is possibilities that are rooted in potential for true nourishment. So I just want to end here with prescribing a practice for you, which is to capture inspiration and to capture your thoughts, right? As you are ending the month, give yourself permission to really focus on what inspires you. And with regards to your thoughts, if you are someone who keeps a journal, I would also recommend tracing your thoughts. Look at the development of your thoughts. You might find that as Mercury enters Sagittarius, it will be more beneficial for you to not just continue writing new things, but maybe revisiting some of the things that you wrote before. Not to try to edit yourself or to criticize yourself, but from a place of really staying with the train of thought that you find yourself in. Okay, so that is a very comprehensive walkthrough of the month. I hope this is useful for you. Feel free to come back to it throughout the month. If you've been enjoying the podcast, I always really love when people share the podcast. That really helps other people find this podcast. Feel free to share a review on Apple Podcasts or leave a comment on Spotify. These things really help. Share on social media. And if you want to work with me, I have one more space for a long-term, by long term, I mean 3 months, stretch of someone to do a coaching and mentorship container with me. Okay, I think that is it. I have some exciting announcements that I don't want to share with all of you yet because I have to get my shit together. So I think I'm going to end it there. But just know that there are some really exciting announcements that I will be rolling throughout the month of October. There's a group program coming. So, yeah, sign up for the newsletter if you want. That is the best way. That's the most I can give you at this point. Okay. I love you all. Thank you so much. I hope you have a beautiful October, and I hope that it's full of really delicious, inspiring conversations. I hope there's some really powerful relational healing that happens in your field. And I can't wait to see you again whenever you come back to the podcast. Okay, take care.